ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cadet Second Class Angelica Noyola. It is my privilege to welcome you to this 30th Annual National Character and Leadership Symposium. Our honored guest speaker for today's session is Mr. Scott Mercier. Mr. Mercier is first and foremost a husband, father, and friend. He works in finance, is a public speaker, and a published author. Mr. Mercier was valedictorian of his class of 13 from Telluride High School, earned a degree in economics from UC Berkeley, is a certified financial planner, and is working on a master's in finance from the Harvard University Extension School. He was Telluride, Colorado's first Olympian, representing Team USA in 1992 at the Barcelona Games. He competed as a professional cyclist from 1998 to 1997 and finished his career as a member of the infamous U.S. Postal Service's cycling team. Mr. Mercier has a daughter and son and lives in Balsat, Colorado with his wife, Mandy. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me with a warm welcome to Mr. Scott Mercier.
Friday afternoon. I know it's just me keeping you from the cold beer, so sorry. We're going to talk about drugs. Okay? Just say no. But thank you for being here. I know it's been a long week. It's been a privilege for me. I'm going to share my story of my path to the Olympics and it's a story of grit and some of the marginal differences between what would make an elite athlete and an Olympic athlete. And then just a little bit about decision making and how some of the choices that you make can stick with you for a long time, specifically around integrity. So, and what I'd like you to think about, I know it's Friday afternoon. I know 1,000 of you can't leave anyway, though, I've been told. So you're stuck here regardless. I think you guys are in the nosebleeds up there, are the ones that are stuck, right? But think about this. I mean, and I know that it's hard to reflect once in a while, but how do your actions align with who you want to be, right? Are you acting in a way that's in alignment with your core values, right? With your mission statement as a person? Are you acting with integrity? And one of the keys that I've found to success is the ability to suffer physically and mentally and withstand pain. This is 1996 at the Tour of South Africa. We were the first professional team post-apartheid. Mandela was the president. I won the stage race, which was the biggest race on the continent. But I put this up here because this is the day that I took the lead. It was about 200 kilometers, 125 miles, 90 plus degrees, and I was suffering like nobody's business. You can just see the physical anguish and pain on my face. And I think that for what I found is one of the keys to being successful is the ability to withstand pain and punishment. So in 1990, when I graduated from UC Berkeley, we were in a big recession. This is outside of my house in Telluride, Colorado. I'm fortunate I have two dads, a Telluride dad who was my stepdad, he raised me, and my biological dad who I call LA dad. And my Telluride dad said, why don't you come home for the summer and race your bikes with your brother? He's like, it's the last time, my brother was 15, it's the last time you'll have any time together, it'll be fun. He was a contractor, he said, you guys can bang nails from 8 till 1, I'll buy you a bike. We had a beat up old van with 3 on the tree. We'd camp out, he paid for our entries. And I ended up winning almost every race I entered. We'd do intervals up this hill to the airport in Telluride. It was about a 5-6 minute climb, 2 miles or so. And I'd do them over and over and over till I vomited. And then I'd do 2 or 3 more. And it's not because I ate that gerbil or whatever they cooked yesterday at the Mitch. It's because I was going so hard. What do you guys call that thing? It is the hamster, whatever, a rodent. It's a rodent of some sort. And it looked like a rodent. And then it was meatball surprise today, so my cadet guide took me to Chipotle, and it was fine. Anyway, I'm off topic, but we would do these intervals over and over, so my training was harder than the racing. And in cycling, there were categories, right? So a category 4 racer is the equivalent of like a junior varsity high school basketball player, a beginner athlete. Then you need to earn enough points to upgrade to a category 3. That might be a high school varsity player. Category 2 would be Division 2 or 3 scholarship athlete. Category 1 at that time, there were maybe 100, 150 of them in the country. And then, of course, national team and professional. So in a period of 4 weeks, I went from a category 4 to a 3 to a 2, I won about every race that I entered. My plan was to backpack around the world for 2 years. I had a one-way ticket that I bought to Bangkok, and I was just going to backpack around the world. But I decided that I would come back and try cycling again. So I went to Asia. You guys will love this story here, because this is Christmas Eve. The guy on the left kind of wincing on my right and the left of the photo. My class was 13 kids in Telluride. And one of my classmates I ran into in a bar in Bangkok. I was getting ready to go to China, and he's like, hey, why don't we go to Vietnam? I'm like, okay, we changed our plans. And Vietnam had a big Catholic, at least in the southern portion, it had a big Catholic influence. And so it's Christmas Eve. It's like Mardi Gras. There's parades. They're throwing confetti. Eric and I are getting into it. We're having fun with the kids, throwing confetti. They're pelting us. And these 5 white dudes are walking down the street. Nobody's throwing any confetti at them. They've got these scowls on their face. So what do? I go running up to them and just pelt them with confetti. I'm like, you guys are commies. You're Russians. They're like, Amerikaners? I'm like, yeah, let's party. So we start partying with these guys. And they were merchant marines. This is on their ship. They sneak us onto the Soviet base. We're listening to Quiet Riot and AC/DC, drinking this terrible rice vodka, smoking cigarettes, and this is the crew right here. To get out of there, it's like 4 a.m, and Eric has this dictionary, and he's looking it up. He looks up diabetes. He wasn't diabetic, but he knew that we could get out of there. He's like, oh, I got to get my insulin. We got to go. So anyway, non sequitur, but it was a lot of fun to travel like that, meet these Russian guys, and there we are. But so what I did is I cut my trip short, and I moved in with my LA dad, moved to LA, had $10 left when I got back. I was not in good shape. I thought the sport would be relatively easy to pick up again, and I'm getting my head beat in. I'm busting tables at night to make some money, training as long as I can during the day. I'm doing like 400 or 500 mile weeks, big volume, but I'm barely finishing races. I'm crashing a lot. I'm all cut up half the time. And my dad asked me, he's like, Scott, what do you want to do? What do you want to do with your life? I'm like, Dad, this is 1991, March of 91. I'm like, Dad, I'm going to the Olympic Games. And he just goes nuts. He's like, what? You want to be a bicyclist? We're in LA, be an actor, it pays more. And he wasn't trying to be a dick. He just naturally is, just like dads are. He became later on one of my best fans. But I bring that story up because my kids are 24 and 20, and sometimes what's that? I didn't hear that, but it sounded good. But so I will project onto them what I think is best for them. But the reality is, the men and women, you as kids, need to choose your own path, but also accept accountability for the results that you get. So I went back home, and my mom could see that I was sick. I'm 6'3". I picked up some intestinal bug. I was down to about 150 pounds or less. We got that cleared up, and I went back to what worked the previous years. Intervals over and over and over until I would vomit. And then you do a few more. Then I started getting stronger. I started getting fitter. I wasn't winning any races yet, but at least I'm in the mix. And the national championships that year were in Park City, Utah, which to my good fortune was at altitude. It was a hilly course. I was a very good climber. And the climb was almost identical to the climb in Telluride where I was doing my intervals. So I go to the race. It's about 110 miles long. And I knew if I got a top 20, I'd automatically get an upgrade to a Cat 1. And that was my goal for this season. It's insane to think that, if I think about it now, that within 4 or 5 months I could go from a Cat 4 to a Cat 1. But that was my goal, top 20. And halfway through the race, Lance Armstrong attacks on the climb. And when he attacks, it's absolute mayhem. It's shrapnel. The field is all broken up. It's stretched out. About 30 seconds later, I get a flat tire. And this isn't like when I was a pro on US Postal. This is neutral support, so there's not a caravan of cars following you with wheels to give you a change like that. I'm standing on the side of the road with my wheel in the air. It takes about 3 or 4 minutes for neutral support to come along, change my wheel. I get going. I'm in dead last place, and my career as a bicyclist is not looking great. But I'm not going to quit. each lap, I would look up the road at the base of the climb, and I'd see a group of 3 guys or 5 guys or 7 guys, and I'd do an interval as hard as I can, and I kept leapfrogging from group to group to group. And on the last lap, I'm in the main field. I'm in the main peloton. There's about 25 or 30 guys in this group. I have no idea how many guys are up the road still. A mile to go, I attack them. I finish solo in 15th place. And I didn't know it at the time, but 15th was especially significant because 15th place was automatic selection to the national team, which I found out a few weeks later. But I still don't know what I'm doing. I've been riding for 6 months total. Tactically, I'm a caveman. I'm crashing all the time. I'm a moron with the tactics, and the racing. So I go to a beginner camp right here at the OTC in Colorado Springs. And at this camp, they're teaching you how to, read a race, what kind of tactics, how to corner, how to pedal through a corner without striking your pedal and wiping out. A lot of really good skills. And one night, one of the head coaches, or a new coach, is presenting race tactics to us. And I find out it's the head of the U.S. men's road team, this guy named Chris Carmichael. So I go up and I introduce myself to him. He's like, wait a minute, you got top 20 at nationals, right? I'm like, yeah. He's like, we got a national team camp in the fall. Do you want to come to that one? I'm like, yeah, I definitely want to come to that one. So I get invited to this camp to go at a national team camp where it's high-level athletes, high-level training. It's about 3 weeks in Colorado Springs. And I would suggest to you that when you're at a camp like that or with coaches at that level, at the elite level, everything they ask you to do is a test of some sort. It was a day like this where it was too cold to ride, it's snowing, we're not going to be able to ride in the Black Hills east of Colorado Springs. So the coaches suggest, hey, let's do some water play. And they said, why don't you guys see how far you can swim underwater in the pool? And some guys weren't taking it seriously, they'd go like 10 feet. Other guys were, they'd go a length or so. I went over 2 lengths, practically drowned myself, and one of the coaches saw this, and what they were looking for was, do they have lung capacity? I get out and he goes, hey, Scott, you got a set of lungs. You should think about the team time trial. And I look up at him, I go, thanks, Charlie. What's the team time trial? And he looks at me, and I'm in the pool still, and he's like, don't worry, you'll find out. But so I got invited to this team time trial camp in March of 1992. I was racing throughout the Southwest. I was the top American amateur. Didn't win any races, but I was getting good results. And there's this cliche that 50% of it's true, but it's really kind of bullshit because it's not all true. It's you've got to be ready when opportunity knocks, right? Be ready when the opportunity knocks. How often does opportunity knock? Never. Yes, you need to be ready. But if you have a job you want, go look for it. Go apply for it. Go seek it. For me, I called up Carmichael. I said, hey, Chris, it's Scott. When's this team time trial camp thing? And he's like, it's tomorrow. Get your ass down here. He'd totally forgotten that he had invited me to this camp. I'm living in Telluride. I'm like, Mom, I'm broke. I got no money, no car. I'm like, Mom, you think you can give me a ride to Colorado Springs? It's like 6 hours away. Thank God for moms. She drives me down here, and we go to this camp, and the first thing they do is they get us in a room, like a classroom at the Olympic Training Center, and there's 12 of us in there. And they're writing on the board the curfew, what kind of nutrition we're going to have, the types of training that we're going to have. And then they drop a bomb where they say, of the 12 of you in this room, 4 of you will be representing the United States in Barcelona at the Olympic Games in the team time trial. And this is an event that I've never done. Really don't know what it is. I've been racing for just over a year now. And one of the other athletes, I'm a major threat to somebody's spot on the team. One of the athletes that was currently on the A team looks at me and he says, you are training fodder. You are never going to make this team. So there was a few F-bombs in my head that I'm thinking of throwing back at him, but I bite my tongue. I don't say a word. But I would suggest that when you're in a competitive situation like that, don't give your competitors extra ammunition to mow you down with, right? That was a terrible thing for him to say. And I thought to myself, I am going to kick your ass. I know you're definitely not going to make the team because you suck and you're fat. There's a lot of fat shaming in cycling because my body fat was, well, here's my modeling photo, right? So this is when I made the national team. That guy, I know we were supposed to have a Navy SEAL. This guy is definitely not going to be a Navy SEAL. My career, even my mother would tell me I have a face for radio, and yeah, she's right. I got to get that. I put that up there because it's ridiculous. The guy takes himself too seriously. But so we are doing something called motor pacing. And if you think of a team time trial, to give you some perspective, it's a 100-kilometer race, 62 miles. It's a 4-man timed event. You can't get any support other than mechanical failures or a crash. You can't get water. You can't get food if you run out of food. And you have to finish with 3 guys. And the guy at the front is breaking the wind because your average speed is about 25, or actually more like 30 miles an hour, 25 to 30 miles an hour. So there's a big wind factor. You're breaking the wind, doing a sprint for about 15 to 20 seconds. Then you pull out, you get about a 60-second recovery, and then you do it again. So it's like doing wind sprints across the basketball court for 2 hours straight. Wind sprint, jog back, wind sprint, jog back. That's the equivalent of a team time trial. And the training that we did was twofold. They broke us up into groups of 6, where they had us doing these kind of time trial events, but they wanted us to stay together. They said, you're going to race each other as a team here, but don't start dropping guys, right? We want you to stay together and learn to work together as a team. And so it's hilly out here, right? The Black Hills east of here are pretty hilly, and we're going up these climbs. And I was a pretty darn good climber back then. And guys are starting to get popped from the group. And so I would literally put my hand on these guys' ass and push them back into the line. They hated it. They get pissed off. It's really humiliating when somebody's pushing you. They're strong enough to keep themselves going, but I had to distinguish myself. There's no way I'm going to make the team if I'm not the strongest by far. So these guys are getting dropped. I'm humiliating them. I'm pushing them back into the line. They can't say anything about it because they know we're supposed to stay together. And on the motor pacing sessions, it's 12 guys, so it's long like this. It's, the guy behind the motorcycle, you're getting there a sweet draft. It's 3 or 4 seconds. You pull over like this, you hit the wind, you're instantly going 8, 9, 10 miles an hour slower. It's about 100 plus feet back. By the time you're back here, you got to reaccelerate back up to 35, 40 miles an hour. And they would go till everyone gets dropped. And of course, it's never the guy that just pulls off that can't get back on. You get back on, it's the guy in the 5th wheel, 6th wheel, 8th wheel. And your heart rate's 200, your legs are screaming with lactic acid, your head's about to explode, you're in so much pain that when you stop, you're done. You stop pedaling, you don't care who's around you. You take everyone else behind you off the back. If you're not paying attention, you're going off the back. Every single time I would sprint back into the line. I never got dropped from the motorcycle. I told myself, I can never get dropped from the motorcycle. Everyone else is getting dropped. I would make it back in there, and he'd keep going for 3 or 4 miles, and we'd do this 20 or 30 times, day after day. And then he'd ease up, let the group come back up, do it again, ease up. And we're doing this over and over. And finally, one day, he looks at me and says, where the hell have you been the last 2 years? I'm like, well, I was at Berkeley drinking beers and backpacking. He's like, you got big motor. We're going to put you on the A-team. So the team time trial was held in Altoona, Pennsylvania. This is the Olympic trials. There are about 25 or 30 teams, 4-man teams, race against the clock. And this is the very first time I've done this event. It's June of 1992. The Olympics were starting in late July or mid-July. So it's about 6 weeks before the games. And I know we have to win. If we can't win our own nationals, we got no business going to the Olympics representing Team USA. And I know furthermore that I better be the strongest guy on the team. If I miss a pull at the front, I'm going to get cut. If God forbid, I get dropped, then they're going to replace me with somebody else. So about 25 kilometers into the race, we get a flat tire. We're a minute and a half down. I think this sucks. We're not going to win. Maybe we can get a medal. It'd be great to medal at the Nationals, my first ever event. But we keep going. 50K, we've cut that deficit in half. 75K into it, we're in the lead. And we know we are going to win as a team. There's no way anybody's coming back on us. But I still got to finish. There's still 25 kilometers to go. So it's about half an hour to go to the line. And I start getting sick. And I'm getting sicker and sicker, and I'm terrified that my teammates and my coaches are going to see that I'm getting sick and I'm weak, that I start vomiting, and I swallow my vomit. It's disgusting, right? It's a crazy person that would do that. But I've had a chance to think about this. A guy who's willing to swallow his own vomit is probably pretty competitive. That's a guy who wants to win. That's how badly I wanted to be a U.S. Olympian, that I would swallow my own vomit. I'm filled with pain, my legs are screaming, I'm sick, and I swallow it back down. But we won. And we made it to the Olympic Games, and I was so mad at myself for getting sick that on the last climb, the team I'm like laying this huge, horrific pace, and they're screaming at me to slow down because I'm dropping them all. But we win the race. We go to Barcelona. We're the very first event of the Olympics, so we don't walk in the ceremonies. Absolute disaster. We'd never ridden these wheels before. We had an alternate that had to come in because our team, the strongest guy in the team, broke his femur a week before. He'd never trained with us. It was just Murphy's Law. Whatever can go wrong did go wrong. We finished 15 minutes slower on a nearly identical course in identical conditions than we did at the national championships previously. But I was 24 years old. We finished in 16th or 17th place. It was humiliating to this day, but it was still a great experience. If you get a chance to go to the Olympics, don't pass it, take it. And that led to a pro career. So in 1993, I signed with the top domestic team, which at that time was the Saturn, and raced for them for 4 years. I was selected to the Worlds in 1994 in the individual time trial. My average heart rate I finished 16th place. My average heart rate clean was 191 beats per minute for over an hour. I couldn't have gone any harder. And as I mentioned to the Tour of South Africa, I won that race and two other big stage races that year. So by the end of 1996, I was the 4th or 5th highest ranked American in the world on international points. And that got me hired by U.S. Postal Service's team. And the Postal team was trying to get points because they were trying to get into the Tour. Lance was not on the team yet. But so I got hired because I had a lot of UCI points, which is the International Cycling Union points. And I instantly knew, we'd heard rumors of doping in the American peloton, but it wasn't really, we were confronted with it once at the biggest race in the US. A teammate and I were using the men's room beforehand, and we see these two sets of feet in one of the stalls, and we hear these Spanish guys going, poco más. You hear the slap, and a syringe fell on the floor. And that was the most direct we'd seen it. But this is my actual blood test from 1997, January 20th of 1997. And what they're looking for is a number of markers. You've got iron on there, but you can see where I've kind of drawn that arrow is your hematocrit. And for endurance athletes, your hematocrit is a massive marker, right? I have a huge VO2, mid-80s of my VO2, but a very low hematocrit. And you can artificially increase your hematocrit with a drug. Well, you can do it by blood doping, by putting a vial of blood back in you, where back then there was no test for a drug called EPO, and it was a game changer, right? Steroids would give you 2-3%. EPO, Lance Armstrong will tell you, EPO gives you 10 to 15% improvement in performance. You're not talking marginal, it's almost exponential differences. And Pedro's going through the test with me. He goes, oh la la, Scott, to be professional in Europe, maybe 49, 49.5. I'm like, gracias, Pedro. How do I do that? He's like, oh, special B vitamins. We talk later. So I do the spring campaign in Europe, and I'm getting my head beat in every race. Same guys that I'd be competitive with in whether it's a Tour of Taiwan or the Tour of China or Australia or South Africa, kind of some of the shoulder season races. You win some, but you're definitely in the mix. You can barely hold their wheel. It's like a baseball player that throws a 92-mile-an-hour fastball, and then you're facing that pitcher 3 months later, and he's throwing 102 miles an hour. That's how big this difference was. And so I'm dejected. And Pedro, it's the end of Tour of Romandy, and we're in Geneva. He calls me into his hotel room, and he pinches my side. He did just like he did at the training camp. He goes, at training camp, he's like, oh la la, you're too fat, maybe 3 kilos. Lose 3 kilos. I'm like, okay. But he tells me to gain a kilo at this point. And he gives me a training program that looks almost exactly like this. And you can see it's big volume, right? 150K, 180K, 140K with lots of intervals, right? Almost no recovery. I had 1 week off. Then there was going to be a big 2-week block of training and then a week of recovery and then you race. So it was about a month off with a 2-week training block. And it was different than from, we would usually do intervals at the start of any ride so you could get the maximum effort out of it. But his philosophy was European racing's hard at the end. So you got to build your base miles, and then you got to be able to do massive, massive watts and efforts at the end of the race. So we did it that way. And he had these weird things drawn on there, these dots and stars. And I asked him, what are these, Pedro? And he reaches into his briefcase and pulls out a Ziploc baggie filled with glass vials, like the ones in the back there, and green pills. And he says that each one of these dots is a pill, and each star is an injection. And so I'm nervous. I try to make a joke. I'm like, is this, Pedro, are these going to make my ball shrink? What are these? He's like, these are steroids. Mild, very mild steroids. No ball shrinkage. That's what he says. I'm like, okay, but you go strong like bull, strong like never before. He's like, you know how to give yourself an injection, right? I'm like, well, back in the heroin days at Berkeley, no. I don't know how to give myself an injection. Told you we were going to talk about drugs. And we're in Colorado, and it's 420. So, safety first. But he was incredulous that a professional athlete didn't know how to give himself an injection. So he kind of grabs one of them. He's like, okay, you're going to break the tip off, and then you're going to go to the pharmacy, get some needles, make sure you have some swabs, and you jam it in your ass, and you go strong like bull. But no racing. For sure you test positive. And I still get chills thinking about this because it made me nervous, right? My hands are sweaty now just thinking about it. I didn't know what I was going to do. Unfortunately, I had time to think about it. So I flew home where I was living in South Africa at the time, splitting time between Spain and South Africa. And it gets time to do the training program. And I had the opportunity to be deliberate about this and think about, okay, how badly do I want this career? And this is going to be step one. I'm lucky that I don't have an addictive personality. But I know that you start down this road and winning is addictive, right? The power that you might get as an athlete I felt like it could be addictive. And I didn't see how it would end well. And I literally have this vision of this flushing toilet, and I'm stuck in this toilet like a piece of shit, just going around and around. And I don't know how to get out. I'm like, how am I going to get out of this circle, right? So I made an extreme decision, and I decided to give up. I'm just starting to figure this out. I'm just playing for the Yankees, right? I'm in Europe racing on U.S. Postal. I decided right then and there that I'm going to finish this season and end my career. And in some ways, I look at that as a moment of weakness, right? I wasn't strong enough to live the lie, but I knew, and Postal wanted me back in 1998, I knew that if I signed that contract to race again in 1998, I was going to be too weak to race clean. And I was tired of the smug look on my teammates and my coworkers, essentially my competitors, their faces, knowing that they have an advantage that I've chosen not to take. And it gets us to this concept of integrity, right? What does integrity mean? Yeah, doing the right thing when nobody's looking. You guys talk about it, it's written all over the place, integrity. This conference is about leadership and integrity. But there's also a structural component to it, right? And if you think of a wholeness or a completeness, and we're going to spend some time talking a little bit about integrity. The Roman legionnaires would have to go hit their breastplates. The centurions would listen for this ping, and they'd raise their arm and yell integritas. They're listening for this distinctive ping. And if that ping wasn't there, they knew there was a breach in the integrity. It had to be strong over the chest because that's where that could be lethal, right? The swords, the arrows, the spears going into the breastplate. Structurally, this is Lake Mead outside of Las Vegas. If you were to just drill an almost hair follicle-sized hole in that dam and not take corrective action and fix that breach, over time, the entire integrity of that structure is going to come crumbling down. And if you think of what are those breaches, right? We all make mistakes. We're flawed human beings. But you can take corrective action, whether it's noticing it yourself, noticing in somebody else. But once you start rationalizing these decisions, it becomes easier and easier and easier to breach the integrity again. So pay attention to the decisions you're making. And does integrity have value, right? If you think of your balance sheet, people think, oh, it's a balance sheet of you got your assets and your liabilities, and okay, we got gold and real estate, and people think of it financially, but think of your moral code, right? The assets and the liabilities that you have, whether it's the intangible assets, your intelligence, your grit, your work ethic. Where would you put integrity? It's definitely an intangible asset that it's hard to value, but it has tremendous value. And is there a price to pay for integrity, right? I have found that men and women of high integrity it can be lonely at times, right? Because people want to drag you down in the muck. Sometimes it's just easier to take a shortcut than to do it right. It's harder to do it right sometimes. And the price, if you think of the price, one of my roommates won a gold medal in the Olympic Games in an event that he never beat me in. I'm not saying I would have won a gold medal, but potentially I could have won a medal in the Olympic Games had I done the full kit like he did. The price can be steep, but the reward is even sweeter. Tyler Hamilton was on the podium ashamed of his medal, right? And this is a decision I made nearly 30 years ago. It's still with me today. And it's an intangible asset that you can't get back. And I'm going to close with a quote by, I got to put my glasses on because I'm old. But this is a crayon eater, I think. The Marine Corps, I guess is what you call them. It's a General Krulak, and I don't believe anyone's said it better than he did. But my challenge to you is simple, but often very difficult. Wear your armor of integrity. Take full measure of its weight. Find comfort in its protection. Do not become lax. And always, always remember that no one can take your integrity from you. You, and only you, can give it away. Thank you, and happy Friday.
Mr. Mercier, thank you for your message this afternoon. At this time, I'd like to open the floor for questions. Attendees may ask questions at their microphones positioned in the audience.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Cadet Second Class Trevor May from CS26. My question to you today is, you said that you hung up the towel. You're like, hey, I'm not going to compromise my integrity for this. Applying to the military aspect of it, when we're going into this pure adversary battle to where they don't hold the same morals as us, where we can't compromise that integrity, but we also don't have the ability to give up the towel, what advice would you give to us going forward?
Wow, really, really tough question. But you're representatives of the United States, and how we do things matter, right? How you win that battle matters, right? Maybe it takes longer, but at the end of the day, right, you're not going to win over hearts and minds by doing what the Russians are doing in Ukraine, that's for sure, right? So I would say, as hard as that is, and I've not been faced with a situation like that, and the men and women in this room may, but do what you can to hold each other accountable and do it the right way, because it will pay off in the end. It has for almost, our country is 250 plus years old now, right? And we are a beacon around the world. And when you start making those, you've seen these military lapses in some of these battles in Iraq and whatever, it's not good, right? The outcome's not good for your peer group. It's not good for us as a country. The consequences are huge. But doing it the right way matters. It matters not just to you and your troops, but it matters to your country and for the future generations. How will you be remembered, right? How are your children and grandchildren, how are your parents going to think about what you've done, right? And to do it with honor is sometimes harder. And thank you for what you guys do, but I would encourage you to remember the ideals of this country and do it that way.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, sir. My name is C3C Nicholas McConnell, and my question for you is, after you quit cycling, did you ever feel resentful towards the cycling world that
Bitter.
that you couldn't compete on a fair playing field, and how did you deal with that resentment?
Oh, it was a tough 10 years. I was so bitter. I wanted them to get caught, but I was just, I didn't shed a tear when it went down. I know that that's bad, it's stupid, but I am also human, and it's just, the lying through their teeth just really grated it. It was a very, very hard decision. I don't feel like my career was stolen from me because I made that choice willingly. I knew what I was gonna have to sacrifice, and I gave up something that was extremely important to me to keep something with greater value and that was even more important to me, right? So I had the chance, right, to maintain moral courage and integrity. It takes perseverance, it takes thoughtfulness, and I was fortunate that I had a chance to do that. But it was a hard 10 years for me. I'm making way less money than I was as a pro. You know, and as a pro athlete, you've got massage therapists, you get the best equipment, it's Christmas, you get all this cool stuff. You're riding your bike on the Great Wall of China, you're racing in Australia, you're living in Spain. It's cool. But I don't feel like that was stolen from me, right? I don't necessarily begrudge the athletes. I definitely begrudge the team. My contract on U.S. Postal had a doping clause that I'd get fired if I had a positive test for the drugs they gave me, right? It just means that I would have messed up in the way that I took the drugs. And when you look back at that calendar, I was racing a week later, clean, right? There's no more steroids in my system, but I've gotten such a higher level of training that I'm 2 or 3% fitter. And at those levels, 2% is massive, right? It's a big, big difference between first and 100th, really, is 2%. But so, yeah, I was not a happy camper for a while. And I questioned, wow, what have I done? Like, what have I done to my family and my family's financial security? It was very hard for me. I'm thankful that I was able and grateful that I was able to get through that, but it wasn't easy. Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. What about this side? You're up next, but we need to get some people from this side. And I'll walk over this way too.
Hello, sir. C2C Allison Langenberg on CS35. So you spoke a little bit about the complexity of doing the right thing. You mentioned that for a while you saw it as weakness, that you weren't able to put up with the burden of doing something that you knew was wrong in order to have success. I thought that was relevant to us. I had a teacher that once told me that the decisions that we're going to face in the military are seldom between right and wrong, but between right and right or wrong and wrong. So my question is how to bounce back if you face one of those complex decisions, you make the wrong call for whatever reason, you're looking back in 20 years. I'm sure you've seen people react to making the opposite decision you did in a variety of ways. How do you regain your integrity? How do you come back?
Well, I think sometimes you never can. Right, I think especially you mentioned 20 years. 20 years later, it's hard to rebuild it, right? Because by that point, you continue to make bad decision after bad. It just becomes a habit that you make the wrong choice and then another wrong choice. And now I got to cover up this wrong choice from back here. But so I think, if you think of that dam, I talked about the breach in the structural integrity. The sooner you catch that breach, whether it's in somebody you care about, you notice it, or if you have the ability to reflect and say, wow, I didn't do that right, and own up to it and accept the consequences. I think the more likely you are to rebuild your integrity. It might take a little bit of time to rebuild the trust if you've violated some trust that way, but I think address it as soon as you possibly can when you've made the wrong choice. Own up to it and accept the consequences, and maybe the consequence is you lose your job. Okay, that's okay. You're still a very skilled person. You'll find something else to do. But once you've accepted that, it's almost like it doesn't matter, right? I've done what's within my control. There's nothing else you can do to me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, we've got a couple lined up over here now. Thank you.
Midshipman Eldridge, United States Naval Academy. Sir, can you please speak to your experience when the doping program came to light, as well as your decision to quit the team, but not to speak out against the program that was happening?
So I spoke out on my own personal experiences. There was no U.S. anti-doping agency. There wasn't even a world anti-doping agency. It wasn't like we were hanging out with our pants down, jabbing needles in our asses. It was individualized, right? So I didn't actually see Tyler inject himself or George inject himself. I saw a bag of drugs that George had, but I never actually saw him take them. So I would share my own experiences with whoever asked. And then time goes on, and I was running a restaurant in Hawaii and moved back to Colorado. So it just went on. And then when Lance admitted all this stuff, and when the USADA finally got them, it came back in my life in a big and unexpected way. Specifically when a guy named Travis Tygart, who's the head of the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency here in Colorado Springs, he sends me this text. I don't know how he got my number, but it's like, hey, Scott, this is Travis Tygart from USADA. If you got a moment, I'd like to talk. And I see this, I'm like, so I texted back, I was like, is this a joke? Why would Travis Tygart want to talk to me? And he's like, no, this is Travis Tygart. So he was calling, he's like, hey, I'm just calling you, we're done with this investigation, and I want you to know that unanimously and unequivocally, your peers all said you were the one guy that chose not to dope. Darren Baker also did, but he shared this with me. And he said, I am calling today to thank you for that decision. He's like, and it's athletes like you why we go to work every day to give you a chance to compete fairly. I don't feel like my career was stolen. I'll hear a lot of athletes, I would have been a contender if it wasn't for the doping. And that's bullshit too, because that athlete is likely nowhere near good enough to be offered the drugs in the first place, right? So there's that. And then there's the ones that whine like, I only did it because Lance made me do it. And Lance is a piece of shit, let's be real. But own up to it. Like if you wanted to be in the Tour de France in the 90s, you're going to be a doper, right? You're not going to be strong enough to help your team. You wanted that fame, you wanted the money, you wanted to compete in the Tour. Yes, you weren't going to be on the team. I wasn't going to get to be on the team. Well, no shit. Yeah, because you're not going to be good enough not doping. So anyway, I went off on a tangent there. Sorry. Did I answer your question, though?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is C4C Hollow from Cadets Washington. I know it probably wasn't an easy decision to make when there's like all this peer pressure to take this dope, like these people that you probably consider your friends were all doing this. So what were some like more internal factors do you think contributed to you making the correct decision?
So I don't feel like there was peer pressure, at least not at that time. It was nobody talked about it. It was an individualized decision. I did ask one of my teammates, I'm like, George, shoot straight with me. Do you have to do this? We had coffee one day, and he kind of pauses, and he just said, Scott, you got to make your own decision. He didn't admit to it one way or the other, but it was very clear that, yes, you have to. So there wasn't peer pressure. I was just not sure what I really wanted to do. I came up so fast. I still had a 10-year runway probably because I came up so late in the sport. I was just figuring it out strategically and tactically. But I knew that it was going to come at a cost that I wasn't willing to pay. And I'm thankful that I had the ability to do that, because life's short, they say, but life's also long, right? And you can have these things that stick with you for the rest of your life, right? We talked earlier, somebody asked about rebuilding that integrity 20 years later. It's probably never going to happen, right? Lance is not always going to be known as a fraud and a doper. That's his brand, whether he likes it or not. And piece of shit is the other part of his brand. Did I answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Afternoon, sir. My question is about how your relationship with the opportunity to dope changed when it was given to you by a coach versus if it had come from that peer-to-peer pressure, like someone with authority in your life. Because as military members, we're in a very hierarchical structure and often, told to follow orders from above, smartly salute, carry on. So I want to know what you have to say, what kind of advice you have to give about that.
That's a question I haven't gotten before, and I'm not giving that some thought. And I will say that in Pedro's defense, there were a lot of athletes dying back then from back alley doping, right? So people ask, how could he honor his Hippocratic oath by doping these athletes? And he was trying to do it in a way that obviously would be fast and competitive, but also as safe as possible. And man, I didn't tell him that I didn't take them. So he didn't know I didn't take them until I retired years later. He just sort of assumed that I would. I still got very fit. I did as much of the training program as I could, but I was unable to complete all of it, right? The first day you can do it, second day you can do it. And if you think of a roid user, typically you think, oh, it's gonna be like Jose Canseco or Schwarzenegger, but for an endurance athlete, all it does is allows your muscles to recover so you can do big load again. And if you're lifting weights, that load's gonna build muscle. But if you're riding 200 to 220 kilometers, you're gonna get leaner. You'll probably lose an extra, we were at 2.5%, 3% body fat back then. So maybe you get down to 2 to 2.5. You get that extra 10 watts of power, and that's a big difference, right? That's a big difference in performance. So I know I punted on your question, but I don't know, hopefully if, I think that if you're given orders that I don't know. I mean, I'm not in the military, so I don't know if you can say, sir, that's a bunch of bullshit. I'm not gonna follow that order. That might not go over too well. But if it's an unethical order, I would hope that they would teach you how to address that. And maybe they train you, I don't know, hopefully part of the training is that they deliberately give you an unethical order, expecting you to tell them to pound sand. I don't know. But I think that's a challenge. And sometimes the orders you get, it's one little piece of the puzzle, right? There's this broader thing going on, and you don't necessarily know how you fit into that. So I've punted on your question. The answer is I don't know.
All right, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Over here again.
Hi, sir. Cadet Second Class Kylie Haney from Cadet Squadron 1. So my mom is currently watching your brief right now, and she has a question for you.
Hi, Mom. Yeah.
So
can you put the phone up to the?
Well, she texted it.
Oh,
to
she
me,
texted.
So I have
Okay.
it.
She snapped.
So it's okay if I read it.
Did she text it or did she snap it?
Text
or was
it
it on? Okay.
It was text.
So she's old like me then. Okay.
So her question is, how difficult was it to transition to make that big jump from cycling to your current career today? And do you have any advice for others that need to make a similar transition without compromising their own integrity?
It's, I think we can leave the transition's hard, right? From being a pro athlete to a nobody's hard. And I think my understanding is that it can be hard for veterans, right? You have so much structure, so much of your identity is tied up into your profession and who you represent that when you move on, and it's the same for pro athletes, it's tied into your identity that trying to find a mentor would be helpful. That didn't exist. I know in many sports today it does exist, but you got to figure things out because being a pro athlete, everything's structured too. Like they tell you, okay, you're going to be racing here, the equipment shows up, you got to train, you got to perform, but you don't have to do a whole lot of thinking and figuring stuff out. So the transition's very hard. It's hard just to figure out, who are you going to be for the next phase of your career? Very few pro athletes, even I guess maybe in the NBA, but even in the NFL, they still have to do something to earn a living, most of them, for the rest of their life. So it's a very, very hard transition. The integrity part, I think we've touched on that. It's just, if you go back to the first slide, are your actions aligned with who you want to be, right? And making sure, I don't know that that's any worse in the transition, maybe out of the service into civilian life or from being a pro athlete to being a nobody. It's a hard transition. And the more you prepare for it ahead of time, I think the better that transition could be. Tell your mom thanks for her question. Where are you from?
San Antonio, Texas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Hook 'em horns. I don't think that's San Antonio, but it's close enough. Yes, sir. Oh, wait. No, we're over here.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Cadet Second Class Chancellor Roche. My question for you is...
Second class, so you're on probation. You can't leave?
That's the entire group, not really that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I am one.
I know that a second was like, somebody screwed up and made it bad for everybody, but go ahead. Anyways, I'm off topic.
My question for you is more so on the beginning of your cycling career. When you're doing your intervals and you're going until you vomit, how do you personally know in that time frame that when you're pushing your body that hard that you're making a good long-term decision for yourself and not just wrecking your body in the short term? Because while pain is something you have to endure, how are you able to differentiate when you're going until you vomit that you're like, hey, this is good for me? Because for me, at least, that is like a pretty difficult distinction.
Yeah, and when you're performing at that level, like it's not healthy to be a pro athlete. Cycling's viewed as one of the most healthy activities you can possibly do. My son's getting his EMT now. He's like, hey, Dad, I know how you're going to die. You're going to die of heart failure because of all those intervals you did. so it's, I'm like, thanks, son. That's really good sleep. I'll go to sleep now. But so it's not healthy, right? And I was a knucklehead. I was 22, 23, so I don't know anything about anything at that point. I just knew that, okay, it felt like a badass. I'm going till I vomit. This is pretty cool. And I did find out later, though, years later, that at that particular time, if you're vomiting when you're like that, it just means you're not very fit. Your body can't handle all the lactic acid, so you throw up because you're just not that strong. But I gave no thought to the long-term consequences. Maybe I'll pay the price later. My career was truncated because I came in late after I was, graduated from college, and I left early. So I'm 55. I try to maintain as much good health as I possibly can. But I'm going to die of heart failure, my son told me.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
C2C Nathan Ewell from Cadet Squad 32. So my question is, you mentioned how, frankly, kind of when you were considering whether to dope or not, you had the luxury of the time.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for those situations where your integrity is on the line and you don't have that luxury?
I've given that some thought. I think you just have to try to buy yourself some time, right? Or if you can rehearse it ahead of time, right? The more you rehearse something, the better you'll be able to react when something goes wrong. I've actually thought about that a lot, and I don't really know what I would have done if he said, like, you got to take this right now. I don't know what I would have done. I hope I would have made the same decision, but I can't honestly tell you I would have made the same decision. And I wasn't expecting to be confronted with that at that time. Like, they kind of knew that I was pretty vocal about not being like, look, I'm not going to do drugs, and I'm not going to be a doper. And yet he thought he was doing me a service, right? Because they're like, and it's almost like you're in the club, like, okay, you're good enough now that, yeah, we're going to pay for these drugs for you. So it's a weird situation, but I really don't know what I would have done if I had to make an immediate snap decision. I definitely hadn't rehearsed it, and I do not know what I would have done at that time. So, but that's a great question, and one I've given a lot of thought to, and I think that the more you can think about situations where you might be forced to make a unethical or to compromise your morality, and if you think about, okay, I could be faced, I know I'm going here, so I could be faced with this, what am I going to do? We'll give you some tools to help address it. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but if it happens, it'll give you some tools. Like the gentleman earlier asked about, what if we're given bad orders, right? So think about that. You probably all got orders that are bad, like you can't leave till May. That's bad. But you earned it, I know that. All right, looks like I'm getting the hook here. So it's been I've been here for a few days. It's my first time on the Academy. I did race bikes here, though, in the 90s. It's really cool to come to events like this. So thank you for your engagement, for your questions, for taking the time to listen to me. Have a great weekend, and thanks.
Mr. Mercier, thank you again for your time today. Your experiences and perspectives speak to how we can re-image leadership and inspire teamwork. On behalf of the United States Air Force Academy and our National Character and Leadership Symposium, please accept this token of our gratitude. The base of this gift is made from marble from our terrazzo. This is significant to us because all cadets have had to run the marble strips during their freshman year. We hope you will look on this and remember your NCLS experience fondly.
Angelica, thank you. Thank you. Go Falcons! Bye-bye. Thank you.